never seen women being part of jirgas. वैसे ही एंटी वुमेन एक कस्टम है. मुख्तारा माई का जो केस है बहुत फेमस केस है. वो एक जिरगे के ही कई फैसले में she was subjected to violence and to rape.
Feminism in general in Pakistan. I would rather trust your opinion on this than a social justice warrior who doesn't have any experience.
Will label feminism as being something against men. Both men and women are often not asked their point of view when choosing a life partner. मेरी मर्जी जब तक नहीं हो, you cannot touch me. That is what it means.
Cost benefit analysis अगर आप करें तो I think if you're making a rational decision, you would rather not have these projects. We live in a time where we can rationalize everything, which is why there is this polarization as well.
The thing to do is to start thinking about how do we start fixing.
Great to see you. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been working for Omar Asghar Khan Foundation for last
20 years now.
20 years now. थोड़ा सा इसके बारे में बताएं कि what the organization does and how did you start here?
So I don't know if you knew Omar. Omar Asghar Khan was a very well-known activist, a political leader, and a very dear friend. And he passed away very tragically under very mysterious circumstances in 2002. So after his death, we decided to continue his work. And his work essentially was to look at how the voices of the poor can be brought into policy making, how a more fair society can be established. That's the kind of work he was doing. And we decided to continue his work, continue his legacy. And that is how Omar Asghar Khan Foundation was started.
Right. और what are the key areas जिसके ऊपर आप लोग focus करते हैं?
You know, we've sort of moved over the 20 years, but essentially our work has been on trying to look at how you make institutional reform. So we work on looking at governance, how governments can be more responsive to what people want. We are working a lot on public finance management because at the end of the day, whether you want water in your taps or you want a road outside your home, all of that really comes from public budgets. So how do you make public budgets more fair, more transparent, more equitable? That's the kind of work we do. We also worked a lot on looking at how to make societies more diverse, more inclusive, more accepting of the differences that we have. So particularly looking at non-Muslim citizens, people who have disabilities, etc. How does the society treat these people? And try to make a society where they are included as equal citizens. And unfortunately, because of the way Pakistan has experienced so many natural disasters, so many humanitarian crises, although we never started as a relief organization, but we were forced to become one after the 2005 earthquake. The 2005 earthquake was a terrible, terrible tragedy, you might recall. And we were forced to respond to that tragedy, to give relief assistance, to look at how people might be assisted in rehabilitating their lives, their homes, etc. So at that time, then we decided to work on how do you make people more resilient to humanitarian crisis. So that's another area that we work on.
Right. And the work that you do on budgets and on gender-based violence and many other areas where you empower women to sort of like stand for themselves in their community and take ownership of a lot of work that needs to be done within their own areas. So how exactly you guys work on those things? How do you mobilize people and raise awareness for these things?
So, when we say, yes, we work in communities, rural and urban, but a lot in rural areas, because we want to work in places which are more poor or more disadvantaged. And there is, a friend of mine, Irene Guit and Meera Shah, had written this book, I think about 20 years ago, The Myth of Community, saying that when you talk of communities are not homogeneous groups. There are different people within the community. And so within the community, our focus, Omar Asghar Khan Foundation's focus, is on those that are more marginalized. So you can be marginalized because of your gender, you can be marginalized because you're poor, you can be marginalized because you're disabled, or you are of a different faith, or if you are, either too young or too old. These are all factors that that marginalize people. So when we work in communities, we work for the interests of those that are marginalized. So women obviously come up as one of our big groups that is marginalized. And having worked with women on their issues, it is impossible not to work on violence, because gender-based violence is one of the areas that affects the lives of women. All women, through their lives face the threat of violence. So even if they are not, even if they're fortunate not to actually experience violence, the threat of violence is always there for everybody, for me, for any other woman. So if you're going to work, or if you're going to school, or if you are in your homes also, the threat of violence never leaves a woman's life. So having, our work then is to look at understanding violence, understanding its forms, understanding how it is manifested. So some of the violence people don't even recognize as violence. So for example, if you're discriminated against, that's also a form of violence. Or let's say within a marriage, if say the wife is emotionally blackmailed, that is a form of violence as well. So a lot of our work is to understand violence, understand discrimination, understanding its roots. So unless you look at when you come to its symptoms, when you come to the manifestation of violence, if you don't go back to where it is actually coming from, you will not be able to correct the system. So we get people to understand what are the roots of our behaviors that are violent behaviors. So one of the roots is obviously our very patriarchal society. We have a society that is extremely male dominated, that has certain perceptions about what should be the roles of women or men. For example, the perception is that a woman is a homemaker, and so has to take care of children, has to do the cooking. It's a perception. So to the point where you will have people, if a man goes into the kitchen, they say, "Why are you going? Why is it not the woman in the house going into the kitchen?" But if you think about it, a lot of major chefs are actually men. Or if you look at our regular truck addas and stuff like that, चाय की दुकानें होती हैं and all that, मर्द पकाते हैं. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि मर्द नहीं पका सकते, मगर ये जो रोल्स हैं, ये सोशली कंस्ट्रक्टेड जो रोल्स हैं, तो we get people to understand that these are socially constructed roles, and because they're socially constructed, they can be changed. So to give you an example, if you think about, say, your grandmother, and you think about your mother, and you think about yourself, you will see that there have been changes. Maybe your grandmother may not have ever been able to drive a car, but today for a woman to drive a car is very normal, it's very common, but it wasn't maybe 2 generations ago. So things can change. And that is what we get people to think about. Okay, how are these socially constructed roles, how are these discriminations affecting them and the society in which they live? And if they want to make a better society, they have to start with themselves.
Work on GBV that you guys do, is it essentially the training, or uske through you sensitize people about what exactly the issues are and how they can sort of like overcome those issues? And I understand that then those people you train, they become the master trainers, and then they go back to their societies and they further raise awareness in their societies so that there is greater reach. Is that so?
So the way we go about it, first of all, we get people to understand what is gender. So either that is through training or through discussions or through material, different ways. So gender, for example, socially constructed roles, as you said, and it's for both women and men. So men are expected to be the bread earner of the family. So that pressure is always there on men. Men are not supposed to cry. Men are always supposed to be, strong. These are the kind of gender roles that are also associated with men. And then for women, it is, taking care of the home, and is always very emotional. And so, those are the kind of things that you see in society, and you see it in your own homes as well. We all face the same social conditioning. So what we get people to do is that when you think about these roles, how does that restrict the opportunities and choices for both men and women? So to give an example, so if you have a home where, say, the woman is more capable, why can't the woman be the bread earner? It's because, and you will see it a lot in educated, uneducated, all classes, urban, rural, the same thing. You will see people saying that, हाँ मेरी बीवी काम करती है, मैं उसे कहती हूँ जो तनख्वाह है अपने लिए इस्तेमाल करो. But why can she not also contribute to household expenses? So this entrenched thinking that we have. But when you think about it, so suppose a woman is more capable, it should be completely okay for her to be the main bed earner, and the man can also earn if he wants.
So it's interesting, like the work that you do with the rural communities. And it also reminds me one of the stories, the documentaries that we developed, or usme, we had this person who was violent towards his wife, and he attended this training, or uske baad he had this realization that he himself was doing the same thing to his wife, and he was wrong to the women in his house. So when you start approaching these people in rural communities, उनके लिए कितना आसान होता है to accept these things और वो realize करना and to then act upon those things as well. आपका experience क्या रहा है? Like, is it easier for, like, how do you compare this to rural versus urban जो culture है?
I think there are a lot of commonalities between rural and urban as well, because the gender roles are universal in that sense. No? मगर जो rural urban में फ़र्क होता है is more access to resources. So in urban areas, you would find that, say, both women and men have better access to facilities. Rural area में उस तरीके से नहीं होता है. And strangely enough, in some ways, I sometimes find that rural communities are more promiscuous because there's much more open, not openness in that sense, but much more opportunity to be together because of the way rural communities are. अच्छा, ये भी एक बात है कि the rural and urban divide is also cannot be generalized, because that's also very location specific. So say a rural area of Koistan is very different from, say, a rural area of Aptabad or of Sindh or something. So हर जगह की अपनी अपनी एक reality होती है. And I think that's the most interesting part of my work, is that it has enabled me to work in so many different places, and I think everywhere you go, you learn a lot about the context in which people live, and how they deal with things. तो commonality भी नज़र आती है, मगर differences भी बहुत नज़र आ जाती
I
है.
remember, like, once I was working on this documentary campaign for education reforms, and we had to go to different areas within KPK. And same for one of the recent projects that when we worked together for Omar Asghar as well. I was just so surprised to see कि within KPK भी बहुत सारे जो areas हैं उसका within that उसमें बहुत सारा cultural difference है. So we see it as like one monolith, लेकिन it's not like that. But वहाँ पर it's very
the
different.
differences even in terms of ethnicity.
Right.
So Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, as you would know, largely Pashto speaking, but Hazara is both Pashto and Hindko speaking. So Abbottabad, Haripur, a lot of Peshawar is Hindko speaking. Mansehra is Hindko speaking. But agar aap aur aage jaएं, so Badagram, for example, is mostly Pashto speaking. And then Kohistan is a whole mix of Pashto and other languages. So, ये ethnicity फ़र्क होती है, ecological differences होते हैं, income sources अलग होती है, agrarian, mostly rural areas are mostly agrarian. But let's say, for example, even if I talk of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, जो हज़ारा का area है, you find a lot of off-farm employment. So you will have a lot of homes where men are working, in Karachi or even in Thailand or all kinds of places. The women are looking after the home there. But you don't find that in other places of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, for example, अच्छा फिर डेंसिटी का भी फ़र्क होता है, पॉपुलेशन डेंसिटी का. अगर आप बलूचिस्तान में चले जाएं तो वो तो इतना स्पार्सली पॉपुलेटेड है कि you will find villages which are very small villages there. अच्छा, and then their lifestyles are very different. Balochistan, a lot of Balochistan is livestock के ऊपर, तो their whole lifespan and their whole sort of lifestyle is around livestock rearing, which is different from, say, where you are doing farming and other things. So a lot of variables affect the way people live and the way people behave.
So these ways of living, or ये जो थोड़ा ज़रा variation that we see within different districts of within one province, how that affects the way people treat each other in specific gender-based violence के हवाले से.
Again, I would say commonality भी है. For example, domestic violence जो है ना, so the practice of beating your wife is probably just universal wherever you go. और जो स्टोरी आप बात कर रहे हैं, जो रूरल पेशावर की जो स्टोरी है, that was just that. So the activist was beating his wife, and he didn't even realize that was violence. He didn't know because he was probably brought up to think it's all right कि अगर खाना नहीं पकाया तो चपेट लगा दो, उसमें कोई बुरी बात. It's the same as when बच्चों के लिए जैसे कि ज़रा थोड़ा सा मार लेंगे तो इसी तरीके से पढ़ेंगे. And there is this whole notion that if you don't beat the child, the child will not learn. Changing but very slowly. तो इसी तरीके से जेंडर बेस्ड वायलेंस में यूनिवर्सल वायलेंस भी है, फिर फ़र्क भी है. फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल हम देखते हैं कि जो ऑनर किलिंग का एक फिनोमेना है, आपको हर जगह नज़र आता है. इट्स नॉट कि एक ही इलाके में है, बट उसका जो हम सिंध में फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल देखते हैं, जिसको कारोकारी कहते हैं, दैट इज़ स्लाइटली डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द काइंड ऑफ ऑनर किलिंग वी सी इन say in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or we see in Balochistan. थोड़ा फ़र्क है. Then there are other customs, so for example Khyber Pakhtunkhwa में is quite common कि अगर कोई दो ट्राइब्स के अंदर फ्यूड है तो वो ट्राइब की मीडिएशन में एक लड़की को आप मैरिज में दे देते हैं. इट्स अ वेरी कॉमन थिंग टू डू. सो द वुमन बिकम्स द बेसिस ऑफ dispute resolution, and there is no question asking whether she wants to marry. And then a lot of research shows कि ये custom में when the woman is given to get rid of a conflict, then she is very mistreated, and she is not treated even as a wife as well.
और ये जो culture होता है when the resolution is कि ख़वातीन जो है they are sacrificed in that sense, ये like who decides that? जो जिरगा होते हैं, क्या वो डिसाइड करते हैं कि इस तरह से होगा, या जो पार्टीज आपस में they decide it?
Yeah, so this whole जो जिरगे का एक इवोल्यूशन है वो भी बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है. हमने एक दफ़ा एक स्टडी की थी उमर असगर खान फाउंडेशन ने कि what are the pathways to conflict resolution that people find, and one of our sort of learning in that, one of our findings was कि the jirga has also evolved, so एक टाइम था कि
और थोड़ा सा सॉरी, लाइक जो जिरगा एग्जैक्टली ये who forms that? जो community होती है वो खुद आपस में मिलके एक वो
Yeah,
बना
so
लेते हैं
so
committee.
normally ये होता था कि people who were more respected for their decision making etc. उनको जिरगों में normally almost always men, never seen women being part of जिरगास. तो वैसे ही anti women एक custom है. मगर पहले ये होता था कि जिन लोगों की बात सुनी जाती थी उनको बिठाया जाता था कि जी आप कोई तस्वीर कर दे, कोई मीडिएशन कर दे. Over time, it's now become more people who have more money have come into it. We have found that जिरगे की अपनी जो है एक corruption है, where जिरगास are paid off to get whatever decisions are made.
और ये जो जिरगा होते हैं ये बेसिकली व्हाई डू दे एग्जिस्ट, के वहाँ पर जो लॉ एंड ऑर्डर सिचुएशन है क्या वो इतनी वीक होती है, क्या कि लाइक पीपल फाइंड के रादर देन गोइंग टू पुलिस और रादर देन गोइंग टू कोर्ट्स वो खुद ही मिल के बैठ के इसको मसलों को रिजॉल्व कर लें?
Our research actually showed that people, when they are part of a conflict, they use multiple pathways. So what they, depending on the nature of the conflict, obviously. तो अगर फ़र्ज़ करें ज़मीन का कोई मसला है तो it's likely कि FIR भी दर्ज कर लेंगे और जिरगे के पास भी जाएंगे, so multiple pathways को इस्तेमाल करते हैं. It's not one or the other. And पहले एक ज़माने में ये सोचा जाता था कि अच्छा जिरगा जो है वो inexpensive है, बट अब ये देखा जाता है कि जिरगे को भी करने में expenses होते हैं because you have to bring people together and do all of that.
And
So
like
it's
you
not
mentioned
as
about the corruption within Jirga as well.
so there's corruption within the
Yeah.
Jirga. And also जो जिरगे के फैसले हैं, the problem with the Jirga is one, not only that is anti-women, it's just based on individuals. So the problem with the Jirga is that it doesn't have any legal framework in which it works. It depends, suppose if I'm part of the Jirga and I have to make a decision, my decision is completely dependent on my worldview or what I think of what should happen or what my concept of justice is, so that then makes it completely arbitrary. And often we find कि जो जिरगों के फैसले हैं, either they are extremely unjust, as we have seen in मुख्तारा माई का जो केस है, बहुत फेमस केस है, वो एक जिरगे के ही कई फैसले में she was subjected to violence and to rape, तो मतलब वो भी साइड है. या आप ये देखते हैं कि what they might try to do is कि कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को रिड्यूस करने के लिए कोई ऐसा फैसला दे देंगे लाइक कि अच्छा जी आप एक लड़की की मैरिज कर दें कि कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को दबा दें. बट ऑफन वी फाइंड कि जस्टिस इज़ नॉट सर्व्ड इन दैट. अच्छा जो भी जितना भी बुरा है, जितना भी इसमें टाइम कंज्यूमिंग है, जो मेन स्ट्रीम जस्टिस सिस्टम है, it is at the end of the day, it operates under a legal framework. It has to operate under whatever the interpretation of laws are, and it can be challenged. There are जो अच्छी बात है legal system की, there is always a right to appeal. जिरगे में there's no right to appeal. जिरगे ने फैसला कर लिया and then you are done, तो बहुत ज़्यादा मसले हैं. अच्छा, और अब एक तो ये भी हो गया है कि जो इसकी यूजेज है ना, अगर कोई दो लोगों में झगड़ा है, वो कहेंगे भाई आके बैठ लो, चलो जिरगा कर लो, and even that's a jirga. Any form of mediation is considered to be a jirga. So then the problem with the jirga is that what is the definition of the jirga?
Yeah.
There is no definition. There is no structured definition which is not bound by any legal framework or anything of that sort.
और आमतौर पे जब जिरगा कोई ऐसा इलीगल फैसला करता है जिसमें a lot of other people, specifically women, they have to sort of like suffer, तो इज़ देयर अ मेथड के जो लोग उस जिरगे में ये फैसले कर रहे हैं उनको भी सज़ा मिले?
अनफॉर्चुनेटली नॉट. आई मीन अगर आप केसेस देखें जो बहुत फेमस केसेस है, मुख्तारा माई की बात हम करें, तो जिन लोगों ने रेप किया था, जो रेपिस्ट थे, they were caught, and they served a bit of term, unfortunately now out again, but nobody caught the Jirga people के जिसने फैसला करवाया था, and that's always very very difficult to do. So and if I'm not mistaken, there is Supreme Court ruling against these jirgas, which are unconstitutional, they are illegal. There is no legal status of these jirgas. तो उसको तो हमें मानना ही नहीं चाहिए.
So what आपकी इस बात से मुझे लग रहा है कि अगर if there is an existence of jirga itself वो that's अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल इलीगल
It's
और
illegal, हाँ.
और उसके ऊपर कोई एक्शन होता है मतलब फॉर एग्जांपल इफ अगर कोई जिरगा जो है वो एक जगह कहीं बनाया है किसी ने तो कैन वन कंप्लेन दैट टू पुलिस या कोई इसके ऊपर एक्शन हो सकता है या नहीं होता है लाइक उसको किस तरह से
अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो हमारी सोसाइटी की फॉर्मेशन है ना तो इन मैनी प्लेसेस अ लॉट ऑफ जिरगास आर रन बाय पीपल हु आर एक्सट्रीमली पावरफुल एंड समटाइम्स आल्सो politically very powerful, so it would be odd to expect the political person to take any action against them. But ये ज़रूर है कि जो illegality है because अगर आप सोचें ना कि जिरगा कौन बनाता है कोई नोटिफिकेशन से तो नहीं होता. How can the government even accept anything that is completely at a customary practice, तो उसको इसकी कोई लीगैलिटी नहीं होती है. मगर ये बात ज़रूर है कि उनके जो जिरगे के फ़ैसले होते हैं अभी रिसेंटली आपने सुना होगा कोहिस्तान में a fake video of a woman led to her murder, a fake video. वो जो पहला वाला केस था where the women were dancing at a family wedding वो तो एक अलग चीज़ है. अभी रिसेंट आया हुआ है कि जहाँ एक जिरगे ने कहा कि कोई वीडियो थी विच वाज फोटोशॉप्ड फेक था मगर उसके बुनियाद पे वो बच्ची को जो है वो मार दिया गया. सो अब आप अंदाज़ा लगाएं कि हाउ कैन यू एक्सेप्ट जिरगाज एज एनीथिंग बीइंग लीगल एट ऑल.
राइट. और इस केस में भी जो जिरगा जिसने फैसला किया होगा कि जो डेथ सेंटेंस जिन्होंने दिया होगा they are like in no way is there any mechanism that they can be caught for these acts or are they considered to be accomplice या कोई is there any accountability for that?
Unfortunately not because as I said उनकी कोई entity तो नहीं है ना. अगर 4 लोग बैठ के कहा कि अच्छा ये जिरगा है उनकी कोई entity नहीं होती है. And I think yes action should be taken against them because of the kind of decisions, but I think it's not actions taken against them. I think what is required is not to accept the jirga as a decision making body altogether, तो अब जब वो हम उस पॉइंट पे आ जाएंगे तो ना डिसीशंस होंगे ना इनजस्टिस होगा ना कोई एक्शन लेने की बात होगी.
And the work that you do उसमें when you engage communities so do you raise the awareness of some sort के people should be discouraged to form these jirga या कुछ ऐसा होता है कि आप कोई awareness raise करते हैं regarding this thing?
So, when we talk of a fair society and we talk of a society where everybody is treated equally and everybody has access to justice, then obviously this comes into it. Although this is not our mainstream work in a sense. But obviously, जब आप देखते हैं कि what are the roots of violence, of injustice, then these kind of customary practices always come up. So then our work would be to get people to consider how these customary practices are causing injustice, and then what you need to do to start to reject these customary practices. No?
Right. I think you're also somebody who comes with that unique experience of understanding the rural and urban realities. And what do you think about feminism in general in Pakistan? Do you think it's a Western concept that we have adopted? Because I would rather trust your opinion on this rather than a social justice warrior who doesn't have any experience and is just following a popular concept.
Well, I would say कि first of all feminism के around जो है ना misconceptions बहुत ज़्यादा हैं. एक तो general misconceptions and then there's a lot of maligning propaganda, so people who are misogynist, who are anti-women will label feminism as being something against men, and they will bracket feminists as women who don't want to marry or don't respect the इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ मैरिज, इस किस्म की प्रोपेगेंडा आपको बहुत नज़र आएगी. बट essentially feminism is about equal rights and equal opportunities. And so when we talk about feminism, we are looking at a society in which men and women both have equal opportunities, equal choices, and they are able to live the lives that they want. अब उसमें अगर आप देखते हैं opportunities and choices, because of the patriarchal society, जो opportunities women के पास है is much less than the opportunities with men. So education है, अगर आप ये देख लें कि employment है, so lesser opportunity for women than men. Much better than it was maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. Things are becoming better. When I started my career, I was the only woman. I used to sit in government meetings and I would be surrounded by men. I was unmarried. I still am unmarried. But men would always refer to me as Mrs. Rashida Dohad, because I think they just couldn't deal with the fact कि अच्छा ये तो एक unmarried woman है, sort of a thing. So वो जो चीज़ें हैं उससे opportunities, choices are restricted more for women than for men. So that's why when we talk of feminism or we talk about gender, the emphasis is more on women because they are the more disadvantaged. But it doesn't mean that we are not talking of equal rights. We are talking of equal rights. So equal rights for men. और एक मैं आपको एक बात बताऊं कि जैसे मिसाल के तौर पे the right to choose a life partner. I think in our society, both men and women are often not asked their point of view when choosing a life partner. तो उसमें women तो disadvantaged हैं ही, but a lot of men are also not asked, तो वहाँ एक थोड़ी सी equality है discrimination में. But in many other things, for example, अगर एक आदमी को let's say 10 बजे बाहर जाना है ना रात के, he will not think twice, he'll just go out and there's no problem. But for a woman to step out at 10 o'clock at night, she has to think, how am I going to go, what is security situation, etc. I have been living in Islamabad now for almost 25 years, and initially when I was renting a place, the first thing I had to think about is that what kind of people are around me, is it secure or not. Normally a man doesn't have to worry so much about these things. तो ये चीज़ें जब आप उसको देखेंगे हर सतह पे आपको ये चीज़ें नजर आएंगी.
And when it comes to like equal rights, I think it also sort of like, I was once having a discussion with somebody and I mentioned about the violence that in some form men also face in their marriages. And so in that conversation I was having, it was like hard to sort of like win that argument that this happens. But again, I think this is something that is not even like considered, that the violence also happens on the other side as well. And like a lot of injustice that happens in the society, yes, women are more subjected to that, but it's not that they're exclusively facing that.
बिल्कुल. In fact, ये जो comment है ना, we often get this, like when you talk of gender based violence, you talk of women facing violence, or you talk of domestic violence, we get this comment very often कि मगर husband को भी तो कोई मारता है ना. But you think about it in the larger scheme of things, how often does that happen? जो औरत है उसको तो not only is she subjected, she lives with that threat. जैसे हम domestic violence की बात करते हैं, not even spousal relation में, a lot of rape is within the family. तो an uncle or a cousin or something. So आप ये सोचे कि एक औरत तो अपने घर के अंदर भी महफूज नहीं है. अच्छा, ये बात है कि मर्द भी एट रिस्क होते हैं, ऐसी बात नहीं. मर्द के साथ भी क्या कहते हैं वायलेंस होता है, और हमारी सोसाइटी में बहुत होता है. मगर in the larger scheme of things, that is minuscule to the violence that a woman experiences or is at risk for her entire life, whatever age she is. Obviously when a woman is younger, she is at greater risk. But आप ये देखें कि कई दफ़ा आपको older person के भी you find rape cases, mistreatment, all kinds of things happen. तो वो at risk जो है, in the larger scheme of things, it's a woman more.
Okay, so talking about feminism, when we think about like the modern day feminism, do you think that we are taking it too far, like in terms of जो recent एक buzz create हुआ because of that मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्जी campaign, and then we have these Women's Day as well, but which is all in the right direction, I guess. But at the same time, do you feel that we are sort of like off the topic now, and we are not exactly hitting where we need to hit?
तो औरत मार्च फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल कुछ सालों से बहुत सक्सेसफुली बहुत सारे सिटीज़ में हो रहा है. पहले आई थिंक स्टार्टेड फ्रॉम कराची, लाहौर, इस्लामाबाद, पेशावर में भी होता है, हैदराबाद में भी बहुत सक्सेसफुली होता है. So I think what they have done is that they have brought out into open many issues that I think were considered to be taboo to discuss. और हम लोग जो slightly older activists हैं, we are in awe of the औरत marchers. We are also part of it. मगर जो एक ज़्यादा young leadership जो आई है औरत मार्च के ज़रिए, I think कि हम सोचते हैं कि ये हम तो बड़ी सोच समझ के जो है ना अपने issues को identify करते थे, and they have been really out in the open, and they've been brilliant. I think their contribution is that they brought out into open many issues that were very difficult to discuss. And जो placards हैं औरत मार्च के, that have become such a big thing, they attract everybody's attention and all of that, I think are fabulous. And you look at them, they are completely organic, and they are in fact I find incredibly creative कि जिस तरीके से ये प्लेकार्ड्स आते हैं. अच्छा, जो बहुत ही मशहूर हुआ मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्ज़ी, और बहुत कंट्रोवर्शियल भी हो गया. व्हाट वाज इंटरेस्टिंग वाज कि जो एंटी वुमेन सेंटिमेंट है, एंटी फेमिनिस्ट सेंटिमेंट है, दे ट्राई टू प्रोजेक्ट मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्ज़ी एज सेइंग कि अच्छा ये मतलब है कि women should sleep around with whoever they want, which was never what the slogan meant for. The slogan means कि you cannot touch me, you cannot come near me until मेरी मर्ज़ी जब तक नहीं हो, you cannot touch me. That is what it means. And it's obviously a lot of women who have experienced violence, उनकी तरफ से ये बात है कि आप मुझे नहीं, मेरी मर्ज़ी के बगैर आप मेरे जिस्म को नहीं छू सकते. But I think जो उस controversy में भी एक opportunity मिली ना, was to have a discussion around that. And we had this discussion with a lot of the community people that we work with, men and women. And जब ये discussion हमने शुरू किया, तो a lot of the men had the same notion कि अच्छा this means कि you can sleep around or something. And then when we explained what it really means, I remember one of our activist male, he said कि अच्छा बाजी आज से तो फिर मैं भी feminist हो गया हूँ. मैं कहा बिल्कुल, so एक ये भी जो feminism में एक problem ये है कि people tend to think that feminism is only something that women pursue. You can have male feminists as well, and we do have in our society even men who are committed to equal rights and equal opportunities. होते हैं ऐसे, but क्योंकि ज़्यादातर women lead the way, तो जब आप feminist movement को देखते हैं पाकिस्तान में, we have the Women Action Forum, which is now more than 40 years old. And started at the time of ज़ियाउल हक, जो एक बहुत ही repressive time था पाकिस्तान में. And they started, and that is where how I became an activist. I was in college, and ये हुदूद ordinances के ख़िलाफ़ जब ये protests हुए, तो I became part of those protests, and that is how Women's Action Forum, to which I am still associated with the Women Action Forum, वो चीज़ें उस वक्त से शुरू हुई. अच्छा, एक जो फ़र्क ज़रूर नज़र आता है कि जो अभी हमारे यंग एक्टिविस्ट हैं, a lot of them बाहर से भी पढ़ के आए हुए हैं, हम ये देखते हैं कि उनके जो इश्यूज़ हैं, they are more in terms of personal rights. So मेरा जिस्म मेरी मर्जी, मैं क्यों खाना पकाऊं, it's more about personal rights. जो हम older activists हैं, जो Women Action Forum के, जो ज़ियाउल हक के टाइम पे हमारी जो एक्टिविज्म थी वो ज़्यादातर political activism.
And against the system as
Against
well,
the
right?
system, it was against discriminatory laws, hudud ordinances थे, जो ये जिना के जो laws थे उसके खिलाफ था. तो I think कि हमारा थोड़ा सा फ़र्क ये है कि political economy की understanding थोड़ी सी ज़्यादा है. And I think the best would be when we come together, we complement each other, because वो personal rights are as important as political rights. But I find कि अगर आप and I'm not trying to characterize anybody or generalize, but I find कि the औरत मार्च में personal rights पे ज़्यादा focus होता है. और जो हमारा Women Action Forum की एक तवील जद्दोजहद है, that has been looking at more political rights, democratic systems, and better governance and equal opportunities for men and women.
So in terms of the efforts जो WAF की तरफ से, WAF, right? So जो in terms of the efforts that WAF has been putting into, do you think कि जब when you started off, this struggle against the system that was, not allowing women to participate in a lot of things, where does that stand now? Or आपका जो that's, do you think that there are like a lot of things that needs to be done, or in terms of reforms in the system still, most of the boxes have been ticked by now?
So when you look at women, for example, there's a very famous book by Khawar Mumtaz and Farida Shahid, which said 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I think that still holds true. So in some ways, if you look at the condition of women, if you look at their access to education, to employment, it has improved over time. But the status of woman in her household, in her community, still remains as a second-class citizen. तो उसमें इतना फ़र्क जितना हम चाह रहे थे शायद नहीं आया है जितनी हमारी कोशिश थी. बट कंडीशंस जो हैं, बिल्कुल आप एम्प्लॉयमेंट को देख लें, आप एजुकेशन फिगर्स को देख लें, उसमें ऑब्वियसली थोड़ी सी बेहतरी आई हुई है. If you compare it over time, it's not where we want to be. Our gender disparity rates are extremely bad. We are lowest in the world, among the lowest in the world. तो उस हिसाब से तो हमारी ज़्यादा बेहतरी नहीं आई है, मगर ये है कि yes, is better than where we were.
So when it comes to accountability of systems like that, तो the work that you do, जिसमें आप ट्रेनिंग करते हैं, and social accountability के ऊपर you guys do a lot of work, तो उसमें is this work just for the communities, या जो law enforcement agencies हैं, जिसमें पुलिस है, judiciary है, कोई उनसे related भी कोई reforms हैं जिसके ऊपर काम किया जाता है?
So what we do is social accountability जो है, इसका concept is, if you think about democracy, we call it a democratic innovation. तो democracy में citizens होते हैं, governments होती हैं, तो जो citizens होते हैं उनका हिस्सा होता है by casting a vote or being part of elections, etc. So what social accountability does is that it takes the role of the citizen beyond the electoral process, and the role is to engage with government. And जब आप engage करते हैं, उसकी जो बुनियादी बात होती है, मैं अगर इसको आसान तरीके से समझा दूं कि नॉर्मली अगर आप लोगों से बात करेंगे, बहुत सारे मसले होते हैं, पानी नहीं आ रहा है, बिजली का मसला है, गैस का मसला है, हमारा बाहर कूड़ा नहीं उठाया जा रहा है, whatever it is, people tend to feel helpless about these things कि अच्छा हम क्या कर सकते हैं, और they tend to feel कि ये मेरा काम नहीं है, ये किसी और ने काम करना है, ये गवर्नमेंट का काम है. And यकीनन obviously primary responsibility for all of this lies with the government. But what social accountability does is it opens a channel of dialogue between citizens and government कि जी ये citizen को किन चीज़ों की ज़रूरत है और गवर्नमेंट जो इन चीज़ों को फराहम करती है वो उसको कैसे बेहतर कर सके. So for example, what we get people to do is to look at their areas and say कि जी आपको किन जो आपके पास facilities हैं, are you satisfied? If you're satisfied, of course there's nothing to be done. But if you are not satisfied, what are the areas for improvement? अगर कोई हेल्थ फैसिलिटी है तो उसमें क्या मसला है. समटाइम्स डॉक्टर नहीं आ रहे होते हैं या मेडिसिन नहीं होती है अवेलेबल. सो वी गेट देम टू आर्टिकुलेट व्हाट इज़ देयर रिक्वायरमेंट एंड देन इंगेज विद द गवर्नमेंट on seeing के इसको कैसे फराहम किया जा सकता है.
So again, like I want to understand the process because like I've seen in some of the trainings that you also conducted. So how does it work? I mean, like जो problem identification की responsibility है, like generally we consider कि that lies with the government. But what you're saying is that through this process, what we do is that we sort of like sensitize people to identify their own issues and then guide the government to work on those things.
Absolutely. But the first step on that is for the person to understand what a citizen is. And हमारे उस्ताद होते थे आय रहमान साहब, and he would always say that just being born in a country doesn't make you the citizen of that country. I mean, अगर आप पाकिस्तान में born हुए हैं तो आप पाकिस्तानी ज़रूर हो जाएंगे, आपको CNIC भी मिल जाएगी, आपको पासपोर्ट भी मिल जाएगी. But you become a citizen when you become an active citizen, when you become an informed citizen. So first of all, our work is to get people to become informed citizens before they even start looking at what needs to change in their community. और informed citizens में जो हमारे steps हैं, first of all, people have to realize what politics is. अच्छा, जब भी हम ये डिस्कशन करते हैं एंड वी से कि अच्छा आप बताएं कि व्हाट डू यू थिंक पॉलिटिक्स इज, तो नॉर्मल जो रिस्पॉन्सेज होते हैं, पॉलिटिक्स इज करप्शन, पॉलिटिक्स इज नेपोटिज्म, पॉलिटिक्स इज trying to be unjust to people, etc. And that is because the way people mostly हमारे बहुत ही depoliticized एक society में उनकी perception of politics is that. But actually when you look at politics is not bad or good. It's the value of the person doing politics that makes it good or bad. And what we explain to them is politics is only about decision making. And the way to do politics is when one or more groups are trying to negotiate their own interests. जब हम इसको इस तरीके से ब्रेक डाउन कर देते हैं, then people start thinking कि हाँ, और आप फिर सोचें कि फिर पॉलिटिक्स हर जगह होती है, हर रिलेशन में होती है. Whether you are in a family, तब भी पॉलिटिक्स होती है, हस्बैंड वाइफ के दरमियान होती है, वालदैन और बच्चों के दरमियान होती है, एक्सटेंडेड फैमिली में होती है, वर्क प्लेस पॉलिटिक्स होती है, पार्लियामेंट में पॉलिटिक्स हर जगह होती है. मगर जो हमारा परसेप्शन ऑफ पॉलिटिक्स है ना, इट्स अ वेरी मायोपिक परसेप्शन कि अच्छा पॉलिटिक्स इज़ व्हाट हैपन्स इन द असेंबलीज, एंड वो भी बड़ा ही स्क्यूड परसेप्शन है कि इट्स ऑल करप्शन, इट्स ऑल दैट.
And also I think like one of the perceptions also is that politics is for rich people.
For rich people. So when we break it down, then they say, हम तो सभी politics कर रहे हैं, हम तो सभी politicians हैं. Then we start, asking them to think about what is democracy. And yes, generally जो आता है for the people, by the people, of the people. Yes, of course, that's the basic definition that most people are very familiar with. But democracy is also where citizens have a right to hold people accountable, hold the power holders who are decision makers, and the decision makers have an obligation to be accountable to citizens. जब आप democracy को इस ज़ाविये से देखते हैं, then it's very easy to come to social accountability. So social accountability is when citizens and government create a system that is accountable. अब उसमें हमारा जो काम है, I've seen other forms of social accountability that is very combative. So it is there to humiliate, कि अच्छा गवर्नमेंट ये नहीं करती, गवर्नमेंट वो नहीं करती. And we feel that, we all know the problems, and we have not used that approach. Our approach is very collaborative. So what we do is that we say कि, open a dialogue between citizens and government, कि जी जो government ने पानी देना है, एजुकेशन है, सेहत की सहूलतें हैं, कूड़ा करकट है, सिक्योरिटी है, बहुत सारी चीज़ें, उसकी फरहमी में उसकी परफॉर्मेंस को कैसे बेहतर किया जाए. एंड दैट इज़ द वे वी हैव गॉन. सो इन डूइंग दैट we work with the community and work very closely with the government.
So in terms of the governance system that you have just mentioned about, and the way people can claim their rights by knowing the budgets and having more making the government make more informed decisions, do you think at the top jo selection of the people, whoever runs the country, it has less impact of how things actually work and how people can claim their rights?
No, I think it's both. Obviously, people who are at the top make the main policies, laws, public finance decisions. So they are as important as those who are implementing at say, the district or the sub-district or the village level. So I think the way to look at governance is that it's a complex system, and you have to see where your input may be required, and how do you go about doing it. I think first of all, the thing to do is to become more informed about governance. How does it function? Become more informed about policies, about laws, about public budgets. और ये हमारी society में I think अभी it's become even more difficult because of disinformation. I was just reading something the other day. वो हमारे दोस्त तलत ने ही लिखा था कि जो फेक न्यूज़ का जो फिनोमेना है, he was arguing कि उसको तो न्यूज़ भी नहीं कहना चाहिए, because it's not worth being called fake. It's not worth calling it news. अगर आप उसको fake news भी कहते हैं तो you're still considering it to be news. It shouldn't be. और हमारे में disinformation इतनी ज़्यादा है. So I think, और जो मैं देखती हूँ,
and so I think we live in a time where we can rationalize everything. I see like a lot of which is why there is this polarization as well, right? So because like there is fake news, there is disinformation, so that actually facilitates the rationalizing of a lot of wrong ideas.
And also, we are living in a highly polarized society, unfortunately. Politically, we are terribly polarized and incredibly intolerant, अगर हम ये सोच लें ना कि जो हमारे मसले हैं, जो डेमोक्रेसी की रूह है, the spirit of democracy is discussion, is contestation of ideas. Now, we need to create that space for contestation of ideas. But if you have that view that, no, I'm not going to talk to you because you're from the other side, or you're not going to talk to me, तो वो contestation of ideas नहीं हो सकती है. And वो contestation of ideas, that generation of ideas, is what is going to help us solve a lot of intractable problems that confront us. So I think कि हमें जो करने की ज़रूरत है to better understand governance, to have more inclusive society, be more tolerant for dissent, encourage more discussion, look at different points of view, ताकि कोई बेहतर solution जो है वो आ सके. I think कि उन बहुत सारी चीज़ों पे काम करने की ज़रूरत है. And unfortunately ये जो disinformation है, that is a big challenge, because उसकी वजह से लोगों के रवैयों में इतनी पोलराइजेशन है, इतनी इंटॉलरेंस है कि हम वो डिस्कशन और डिबेट पे आ ही नहीं पाते. So, lots of challenges, but I would like to think I'm an eternal optimist, and I think there are still a lot of people who would like to do good things, and I think we need to just continue working, have hope, dream of a better future, and have the courage to go after that dream.
And it also reminds me one of the case studies that we were doing, जिसमें जो स्कूल थे वो तबाह हो गए थे एक ज़लज़ले की वजह से, और देयर वाज अनदर जो दहशतगर्दी की वजह से तबाह हो गया था. एंड आई रिमेंबर व्हाइल वी वर कवरिंग दैट, सो the community members within that area, they wrote those petitions, so like they had that awareness by the training programs जो आपने किए थे, so they knew how to write those petitions and who to approach to, and then that helped to expedite the process कि वो school की वहाँ पे rehabilitation start हो सके.
So that's part of the training. First of all, the most important thing for people to understand is that when they've identified the problem, they need evidence. हमारी सोसाइटी में ना बहुत ज़्यादा hearsay पे बहुत बात है. अच्छा ये फला ये ऐसा हेल्थ फैसिलिटी में तो डॉक्टर आता ही नहीं है. एंड देन यू से कि अच्छा व्हाट एविडेंस डू यू हैव दैट डॉक्टर नहीं आ रहा है, और वो एविडेंस पे नहीं होती है. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी ट्रेन देम कि जी आप पहले अगर कुछ कह रहे हैं, जैसे स्कूल की आप बात करें, ऑब्वियसली द स्कूल वाज डिस्ट्रॉयड बाय द 2005 earthquake, एंड देन वी हेल्प देम टू अंडरस्टैंड कि इसके थोड़ा सा डेप्थ में देखें. व्हाट वाज द प्रॉब्लम, हु वाज सपोज टू what level of government was supposed to deal with it. So if you remember that zalzale ke case mein, there was a whole institution set up which was called the ERA, uska naam tha, Earthquake Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Authority. तो पहले जिम्मेदारी उसको दी गई थी, फिर ओवर टाइम फिर वापस गवर्नमेंट पे आए. तो when the citizen is engaging with the government, the first thing you have to also understand, get the evidence behind your problem, but also understand who you have to engage with. अच्छा हमारे यहाँ ये होता है कई दफ़ा के बिकॉज हमारी जो रिलेशनशिप्स है ना बहुत वो है कि अच्छा मैं फ़लाँ को जानता हूँ या मैं फ़लाँ को जानती हूँ. तो कभी कभी अगर पानी का मसला है, they'll try to go to the chief minister or to an MNA or something कि जी मैं उनको जानता हूँ जानती हूँ या constituency में. But then we say why would you go to अगर पानी का मसला है, what can the chief minister do? You have to go to to your local council, to local government.
और इसमें भी like until unless you don't go to that local council who's responsible for those things, for them to know कि this actually problem persists, जब तक आप उनके पास वो मसला लेके नहीं जाएंगे, आई मीन वन कैन नॉट एक्सपेक्ट कि उनको ऑटोमेटिकली पता चल जाए कि ये मसला एग्जिस्ट करता है. या
कई दफ़ा उनको कुछ पता भी होता है, मगर ज़ाहिर है एंड स्पेशली हमारे यहाँ इतनी सेंट्रलाइज सिस्टम्स ऑफ गवर्नेंस है. सो फॉर एग्जांपल अगर से डिस्ट्रिक्ट हेडक्वार्टर है जहाँ बहुत सारे गवर्नमेंट की ऑफिसेज होती है, फॉर देम टू नो एवरी सिंगल विलेज, every single lane is difficult, so that is why जब हमने social accountability की है, हमें बहुत सारे government officials, public representatives के ये response आती है कि thank you so much for giving us this opportunity of finding out this is a problem. So I'll give you an example. पब्बी में एक केस था street lights का, if you might remember, and वहाँ street lights नहीं थी. उसमें ये मसला था कि चोरी चकारी बहुत होती थी, स्पेशली मोबाइल्स स्नैचिंग, एंड व्हाट इट वाज डूइंग, एंड it also related to gender based violence, because women were more at threat or more at risk of violence because of darkness. And what it had done was कि लोगों की ना social relations had also been affected, because they would tend not to go out in the evening because लाइटें ही नहीं थी, डार्क में आना, being a threat of violence, तो वो ये नहीं करते थे. Then it also affected their economic conditions. So for example, if you had a job that required you to be out late at night, you would try to avoid it because you didn't want to come home in the dark, तो ये इशू इन्होंने रेज किया. एंड उस वक्त लोकल गवर्नमेंट वाज इन प्लेस, डिस्ट्रिक्ट नाजिम्स वर इन प्लेस, एंड डिस्ट्रिक्ट नाजिम के पास हम गए, लोग लेके गए इस इशू को, एंड व्हेन ही लुक्ड एट इट, the total expense on getting those street lights in that particular mohalla was about 3 lakh rupees. So it's hardly anything. मगर जो लोगों की ज़िंदगी में तब्दीली आई और वो नाजिम को भी इतनी पजीराई मिली लोगों की तरफ से, उसने ये कहा कि जी ये पूरे डिस्ट्रिक्ट में लगा दे. सो ही ऑल्सो अंडरस्टूड. नॉर्मली ना जो पब्लिक रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स होते हैं, दे ट्राई टू गो फॉर बिग प्रोजेक्ट्स, बिकॉज बिग प्रोजेक्ट्स होते हैं, वाह वाह होती है कि फलां जी 3 लाख रुपए खर्च कर दी, उसकी कौन सी इतनी बड़ी बात है. मगर आप अगर
और ये 3 लाख रुपए बेसिकली जो गवर्नमेंट का बजट एलोकेट किया होगा उस एरिया के लिए,
जो गवर्नमेंट का बजट एलोकेट, आई थिंक दैट्स द ब्यूटी ऑफ सोशल अकाउंटेबिलिटी इज दैट जो इम्प्रूवमेंट्स है दे कम फ्रॉम पब्लिक मनी. तो what social accountability does is it helps government improve the targeting of their own resources. A lot of our resources कम है, वो तो हम सबको पता है. We are in a very difficult economic situation, but बहुत सारे resources waste भी होते हैं because they are put to projects which are inappropriate or are not successful or are not high impact or not what the people want.
I mean, sometimes a lot of money is also spent on areas that should not be the priority of the people, right?
I mean, a prime example of that is these BRTs and things,
Yeah.
Clearly, because, the studies show that जो urban transport है all over the world is, run on subsidies. And our government cannot afford subsidies. So already जो ये projects है run तो हो रहे हैं, बहुत लोगों को फायदा भी हो रहा है. But in the long run, was it strategically the wisest decision to be made? I mean, एक argument है Karachi का, for example. Karachi has a circular railway which has been dysfunctional or can be improved, but कोई उस पर ध्यान ही नहीं देता. अगर उसको आप चला लें, तो maybe that's a better thing rather than getting more green buses or whatever it is. Urban transport is a big requirement. उसकी तो कोई disagreement नहीं है. But should it have been these dedicated BRTs? Should only the big cities benefit from these things? What happens to transport requirements of other places? So, I would argue that it's not that urban transport is not an issue, but the solution to urban transport, could we have thought of better things?
और जो जनरली एक परसेप्शन होती है, आई रिमेंबर ये जब BRTs इन पंजाब में भी जब मेट्रो बस का जो प्रोजेक्ट इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया था, सो अ लॉट ऑफ पीपल वुड आर्ग्यू दैट वी नीड मोर हॉस्पिटल्स फॉर एग्जांपल, और वी नीड मोर better universities or better facilities than having this project, a mega project that had like a lot of budget put into it, or usko sustain karna is also very challenging. And also, like, I think a lot of times it's also about just making sense of the KPIs as well. I mean, jo ye jitne urban transport ke ambitious projects hain, at the end of the day, if you see ke how many people they are benefiting, that's not a large population jisko wo benefit kar rahe hain. So it's also like, then at the top of that, you're also giving subsidy to those projects. So I think कि जो if you analyze के जो उसका cost benefit analysis अगर आप करें, तो I think कि if you're making a rational decision, you would rather not have these projects.
Sure. I would argue कि जो road systems होती हैं, that is obviously required not just for mobility but also for the economy. So you need to have ways of transporting goods, services, everything. So it's not कि road system की ज़रूरत नहीं है. Of course है, मगर वो किस तरीके से है ना, जो लियारी एक्सप्रेसवे का है, लियारी एक्सप्रेसवे को बनाना चाहिए, ये नहीं कि ना बनाए. मगर अब वो जो धोबी घाट वाली कम्युनिटी थी, अगर उसको स्टार्टअप ग्रांट दे देते तो फिर it would have been a win-win situation. And यहाँ ये हुआ कि it wasn't a win-win situation. I benefited, but I'm not the most vulnerable community. जो vulnerable थी, they got got a raw deal out of it.
I was speaking to one of civil engineers who happens to be my cousin. तो उससे मेरी डिस्कशन हो रही थी, एंड ही मेंशन्ड दैट अ लॉट ऑफ दीज मेगा प्रोजेक्ट्स, अगर कुछ जो प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, अगर इफ़ दे आर लाइक अंडरग्राउंड फॉर एग्जांपल, दे कैन लास्ट लॉन्गर. जिस तरह लंदन का भी मेट्रो सिस्टम है, दैट वाज बिल्ट इन द 18th-19th century एंड इट हैज़ लास्टेड for so long. But the reason why these projects are over the ground is कि लोगों को नज़र आए कि ये काम हुआ है, and then just to get
it's the same as big dams, na Jawad, ke who wants to open a check dam? The opening ceremony of a check dam doesn't make news, but opening ceremony of a large dam will make news. तो ये भी एक politics है. मगर मैं आपको एक बात बताऊं कि it's not that one is against development. You need development. But जब आप development करते हैं, मैं आपको एक मिसाल देती हूँ. My family comes from Karachi, और कराची में एक बहुत बड़ा project था. It was called the Liari bypass. I'm a beneficiary of that project because हमारी जो फैमिली ग्रेवयार्ड है वो मेवा शाह का कब्रिस्तान है, और हमें पहले जो है ना लियारी रिवर के थ्रू एक बहुत ही टूटा फूटा रास्ता था, उसके थ्रू कोई 45 मिनट्स टू एन आवर जाके हम कब्रिस्तान जाते थे। अब ये लियारी बाईपास बन गया है, लियारी एक्सप्रेस वे बन गया है, आई एम देयर इन 10 मिनट्स, सो आई एम अ बेनिफिशियरी, आई एम वेरी हैप्पी विद द लियारी एक्सप्रेस वे। एंड इट्स नॉट कि ये एक्सप्रेस वेज नहीं होने चाहिए, बट व्हाट हैपेंड विद द लियारी एक्सप्रेस वे वाज व्हेन इट वाज बिल्ट, जो लियारी रिवर के इर्द गिर्द कम्युनिटीज़ थी, उनकी धोबी घाट थी, दे वर डूइंग लॉन्ड्री एंड what they were done, जो डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स में ऑफन ये होता है कि the government will get land and they relocate people, resettle people, and these people were also resettled. Unfortunately, जिस जगह पे वो resettle हुए वहाँ कोई दरिया नहीं था, तो they couldn't do their traditional laundry work that they had done, and that is what they knew. तो in that sense, जो धोबी घाट community, which was the poorest in that, was affected by this लियारी expressway. Now, what it means is कि it's not कि आप लियारी expressway ना बनाएं, but जब आप लियारी expressway बना रहे हैं, then you have to look at all the people that are going to be affected by because every project will affect people, and then you look at who is affected the most, who is the most vulnerable, and then for example in लियारी expressway, ठीक है, अगर वो उस जगह चले गए हैं, अब आप लॉन्ड्री की खातिर कहीं वहाँ रिवर तो नहीं बना सकते, दैट्स नॉट पॉसिबल, मगर आप उनको कोई ऑल्टरनेट इनकम दे दें, आप कोई ऑल्टरनेट स्टार्टअप ग्रांट दे दें ताकि वो कोई मज़ीद इनकम की तरफ जा सके, दैट वुड हैव बीन अ फेयर वे ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्टिंग द लियारी एक्सप्रेस।
सो इन टर्म्स ऑफ गवर्नेंस सिस्टम दैट वी हैव नाउ इन प्लेस, इसमें मुझे थोड़ा बताएं कि उमर असगर खान फाउंडेशन इसके ऊपर क्या एग्जैक्टली काम कर रही है, एंड व्हाट डू यू थिंक इन योर ओपिनियन कि हाउ द सिस्टम ओवरऑल कैन इम्प्रूव?
So I think one of the first things is to first of all understand governance, and I find that a lot of people have such misconceptions about what governance is. कि अच्छा जी फलां की गवर्नमेंट बड़ी करप्ट है, फलां का ये है, फलां का ये है, but actually governance is such a large entity, and we have found in our work that you can always find allies, people who are looking for reform, people who are trying to improve things. And हमारा फिर काम ये है, जैसे हम जो पब्लिक बजट्स पे काम करते हैं, वी वर्क ऑन लुकिंग एट हाउ दोज बजट्स, बिकॉज जो गवर्नमेंट का पूरा सिस्टम है इसमें पॉलिसीज़ आर इम्पोर्टेंट, लॉज आर इम्पोर्टेंट, बट जो पॉलिसीज़ और लॉज की इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है उसके लिए यू नीड रिसोर्सेज, एंड रिसोर्सेज कम फ्रॉम बजट्स. So if you're talking about, our country needs more hospitals, it will come from budgets. You need a policy for better healthcare, and then you need the resources put there to say कि hospitals होने चाहिए. Or you say कि we need better drinking water, more clean drinking water, we need more security, we need to get rid of extremism in our, a lot of that has to then do with budgets. तो हमारा काम ये है कि हम गवर्नमेंट बजट्स को एनालाइज करते हैं कि क्या प्रायोरिटीज़ है, गवर्नमेंट की क्या प्रायोरिटीज़ नज़र आती है, बिकॉज असेंशली जो बजट है ना, अगर आप किसी को पूछ लें नॉर्मली कि जी बजट, नॉर्मली पीपल थिंक ऑफ बजट्स अराउंड जून, हाँ जी जून में बजट आता है. और आजकल एक ये भी हो गया कि बजट्स जो हैं, अगर आप देखिए इतने खरब रुपए, इतने फलां रुपए, अगर आप मुझे पूछे, मुझे तो अंदाज़ा ही नहीं कि खरब होता कितना है. तो अगर मैं पूछूं कि अगर 5,000 रुपए की नोट हो तो खरब कितना होगा, इतना होगा, इतना होगा, या कितना होगा, अंदाज़ा ही नहीं है ना. एंड दैट काइंड ऑफ मेक्स बजट्स वेरी टेक्निकल and very intimidating, and therefore people tend to not focus on it. But it is extremely important for citizens to engage in budgets, because अगर आपने अपने एरिया के कूड़े करकट को बेहतर डिस्पोजेबल पे जाना है, या आप चाहते हैं कि आपके इलाके में गर्ल्स स्कूल्स हों, या एम्प्लॉयमेंट की अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ ज़्यादा हों, या यूथ के लिए प्रोग्राम्स हो, all of that you need to delve into the budgets.
So for a normal citizen, जब budgets जो हैं when it becomes public, तो उसको पढ़ के उसमें से they can what exactly they can figure out कि किस चीज़ के लिए कितनी allocation है, and then for their problems in their community how they can sort of like get those resolved? Is that the
I would say you put the cart before the horse in a sense, because first of all, you have to identify your problem. So say for example, your problem is that there are not enough vocational centers in X district, let's say whatever X district it might be. तो that is your problem, right? फिर आप बजट को देखें कि जी अच्छा बजट में कोई गुंजाइश है वोकेशनल सेंटर्स की. अच्छा, suppose you're looking for vocational centers especially for women, or you're looking for vocational centers especially for people with who are non-Muslim citizens, वो आपको then you go into the budget and you look for it कि जी ये इसमें है या नहीं है. Budgets actually are just lists. They're not that difficult to understand. अगर आपको पता हो कि what you're looking for, and because of a lot of e-governance जो हुआ है over the years, as soon as the budgets are approved, they're all on websites. So you can go into any provincial or the federal government website and you can look at the budget, and then you go into the by sectors. आप sector के अंदर चले जाएं, आप कोशिश कर vocational centers normally would be under education. अब एजुकेशन में चले जाएं, आप देखें कि कितना बजट है, एंड दैट information will help you to demand those vocational centers. So if you and then you start engaging कि अच्छा मुझे vocational center कौन दे सकता है, what part of government can give me, so then you look at that and you start engaging.
Right. So for example, if there is a person जिसके area में they feel कि hospital नहीं है या school नहीं है, so they will go through the budget and they realize there is budget allocated for that.
Yeah.
And then they can go to the relevant authorities and maybe like write a petition or talk to them. How does exactly it work?
So let me give you a concrete example. So Kohistan mein there was this Tehsil headquarter hospital which had a capacity of 100 beds. There was a gynae ward, there was a doctor's facility. We came upon it in 2011 after the 2010 floods. जब 2010 के floods आए जिसमें Kohistan was devastated. So we were working with the community and we saw this huge construction. It was completely constructed. It's completely dysfunctional. उस वहाँ एक प्लाक लगा हुआ था ओपनिंग का कि उसकी तारीख भी थी फरवरी 2007 की. But dysfunctional. So then we started looking at the budget. So there is this Tehsil headquarter. Why is it not functioning? Budget में नज़र आ रहा था equipment के लिए पैसे allocate, no spending. Allocation, no spending. So that information helped us engage the government to say, look, here is this whole infrastructure. Why is it not working? You also have money for it. Why is the money not being put into it? अच्छा, पहला मसला ये था कि वहाँ बिजली नहीं थी. तो पहले बिजली का कनेक्शन जो है वो 2016 के इर्द गिर्द आया. And we were very lucky that one of our journalist friends, Talat Hussain, when he was covering the flood area in 2016, so he covered this for us, and he उनका एक शो आता था, उसके ऊपर कवर हुआ. नेक्स्ट डे DC भी आ गया उधर. What the good thing is that today that facility is now functional, not 100%, but वहाँ OPD चलती है, वहाँ नशुमान एक प्रोग्राम है for children, वो चलता है, वहाँ 1112 रेस्क्यू सिस्टम चलती है. एंड वो जो स्ट्रक्चर था वो पब्लिक टैक्सेस से ही बना हुआ था, 2007 का बना हुआ था. It eventually became functional in 2016. तो आप अंदाज़ा लगाएं कि 11 साल तक वो dysfunctional था. But this जो social accountability, understanding budgets, tracking the budgets ने हमने जो काम किया, that helped in making that facility now functional, and we believe it is now going to be upgraded into a DHQ because Kohistan has turned into 3 districts.
So what I want to understand is like you, Omar Asghar Foundation as an organization, did you take that initiative to talk to the relevant authorities, or did you empower the community members to take lead on that?
Both. We empowered the community to do it, and we have also worked with legislators हमने बहुत काम चारों जो सूबाई लेजिस्लेटर्स हैं, जो फेडरल नेशनल असेंबली में लेजिस्लेटर्स हैं, जो अभी 2018 के बाद जो सारी असेंबलीज आई हैं, हमने चारों सूबों और फेडरल गवर्नमेंट में भी काम किया और आगे भी करेंगे. एंड वी वर्कड विद द लेजिस्लेटर्स टू से कि लुक, दिस इज़ व्हाट द बजट इज सेइंग. देन बेस्ड ऑन दैट दे मेड देयर रिकमेंडेशंस कि व्हाट काइंड ऑफ फंड्स दे रिक्वायर. उसका जो नतीजा हुआ कि जब पार्लियामेंट्री डिबेट होता है बजट में, एंड वी वर वर्किंग मोस्टली विद द विमेन पार्लियामेंटेरियंस, फीमेल पार्लियामेंटेरियंस होती है, उनके साथ हम काम कर रहे थे. तो दे मेड द प्रपोजल्स एंड खैबर पख्तूनख्वा में इन 2021 दे वर एबल टू गेट एन एलोकेशन ऑफ 1 billion. And the following year, it increased to 3.5 billion. Now, you may ask, okay, well, so what? What does this mean? So that allocation then essentially means led to Darul Amans being made, forensic system capacity being increased in KP, education facilities being extended, sporting facilities. तो ये जो amounts होते हैं, they essentially then turn into facilities for the public. तो legislators के साथ भी काम किया, गवर्नमेंट के साथ, ऑफिशियल्स के साथ भी काम किया, बिकॉज कभी कभी ये होता है कि फंड्स एलोकेट हो जाते हैं मगर ना डिस्पर्स होते हैं, ना इस्तेमाल होते हैं.
तो इन दिस पर्टिकुलर केस जिसका आपने बताया, अगर आप की इसमें एफर्ट ना होती, तो हाउ दैट बजट वुड हैव बीन स्पेंट, वो फिर लाइक हाउ डज इट वर्क कि वो बजट फिर दूसरी चीज़ों पे एलोकेट हो जाता है इफ इट्स अंडर स्पेंट? और
so I mean we every country has this problem. It's not just us. That resources are limited and problems are unlimited. So essentially a budget जो होता है, that shows you what are the priorities and the choices that the government is making, and the government has to make these choices because there are always limited resources. Even if you are in very developed countries, they have the same problem. तो ये जो choices होते हैं वो किस तरीके से बनते हैं. Now in our case there is a whole system through which these allocations are decided. Unfortunately, not entirely always based on evidence, not entirely always based on what citizens want.
Right.
तो जो हमारा काम है, that enables citizens, legislators, government to get the benefit of public input so that they can make better decisions. अच्छा, वो better decisions बनाएंगे, they will be more popular, citizens will be more happy. Everybody, it's a win-win situation. Nobody loses in this. I think the only people who might lose is those people who don't want to see any change. हमारा experience ये है कि government इतनी बड़ी चीज़ होती है, आपको हमेशा कोई ना कोई मिल जाता है who is actually trying to do something good. तो उनके साथ हम कोशिश करते हैं कि ज़्यादा काम करें. Those people who want to work well, उनके साथ हम काम करते हैं ताकि कोई हम on the ground services में, people's lives में कोई improvement लग जाए. And I think for me the best part of our work is when we see somebody's life changing, when we see some improvement in an area, like ये कोहिस्तान का जो मैंने आपको एग्जांपल दिया, this THQ being functional. कोहिस्तान वो जगह है जहाँ बहुत ही कम हेल्थ फैसिलिटीज़ हैं, and because the Karakoram runs through, as you might know, the Karakoram highway runs through that. It's a mountainous area. तो बहुत accidents भी होते हैं. A lot of people lose their lives because there is no rescue service. So just having that place there functional, I don't have the figures of how many lives it may have saved, but definitely it is saving lives. So I think that is the best part of our work. When we see something like that happening, when we see an improvement, then all the problems that we encounter are all worth it, because you feel कि अच्छा चले, is well worth all the effort made.
Yeah.
at the end when you see something like that. And fortunately we do see a lot of that. किसी गांव में अगर पीने का पानी आ गया है, कि कोई हेल्थ सिस्टम बेहतर हो गई है, कहीं अगर मेडिसिन आ गई हैं, कोई एजुकेशन, कोई स्कूल है जहाँ पहले बिजली नहीं थी वहाँ बिजली आ गई है, whatever it is, whatever form that improvement is, I think it leads to an improved life of people, which is the best thing. एंड आई थिंक जो एक और बहुत ज़बरदस्त बात होती है कि हम बहुत गरीब लोगों के साथ काम करते हैं. एंड नॉर्मली हमारी सोसाइटी ऐसी है कि गरीब जो है ना आर नॉर्मली वॉइसलेस. जब हम देखते हैं कि जो कॉन्फिडेंस लोगों में आता है, सोशल अकाउंटेबिलिटी करते हैं, बजट मॉनिटरिंग करते हैं. आई हैव हैड अ लॉट ऑफ केसेस वेयर मेन विमेन हैव कम टू अस एंड सेड हम तो कभी इमेजिन ही नहीं कर सकते थे कि हम डीसी के साथ भी बात कर सकते हैं, मगर आज हम डीसी के साथ भी बात कर रहे हैं, हम एमएनए के साथ भी बात कर रहे हैं, अपनी बात आगे रख रहे हैं, अप्रिशिएट हो रहे हैं. तो वो जो एतमाद आप देखते हैं, वो जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन आप लोगों के अंदर देखते हैं, आई थिंक दैट्स द बेस्ट रिजल्ट ऑफ आवर वर्क.
So tell us about your journey. How did you start and how did you get into this profession?
You know, my life is completely unplanned. I never planned to be here where I am today. Things just happened for me. I was born in India, and I was 2 years old when my family moved to Pakistan, and we have lived in Karachi ever since. So I'm a Karachiite. My schooling, university, college, everything was in Karachi, and I grew up there in a very ordinary household, a very middle class household. Politically, I would say not into mainstream politics, but we were always the family that voted. So we were politically aware family. My mother was a big influence in my life, but I had a very carefree sort of a youth. Then my mother passed away with cancer when I was very young, and I think that was a turning point in my life when I took my life a little bit more seriously. Did more serious studies, thought about where to move forward and all of that. And then over time came into development, sort of stumbled into it really. So strangely, I'm a completely city person. I'm a urban person. So, and had the same kind of romance with rural, एक romantic notion होता है ना what rural life is all about. So got a hard I had to learn my way into what rural life is all about, and all of that. So for me, this whole journey has been a learning journey, and I think I was very fortunate to meet Omar Asghar Khan was also a very big influence in my life. He really is the person who brought me into understanding politics, understanding rights, understanding vulnerabilities, and the work that Omar did influenced a lot of what I do now. As I try to take his work forward, I feel that जो roots हैं वो उमर के साथ जो काम किया था, उससे पहले I was with environmental work that I was doing. So a lot of influences have shaped me, I think. But completely unplanned.
And when did you move to Islamabad from?
Oh, way back in 1996. I came here for a 1-year contract. There was a job that I took up, and I thought to myself, I'm a Karachiite. I'm just here for 1 year. Islamabad is too boring. So I'm just going to go back after my year finishes. And a friend of mine, economist friend, Kaisay Bengali, he said, Rashida, if you spend more than a year, you will never go back. And he was completely right.
I think the same is the case with me.
He was completely right. I spent more than a year, and it's been 26 years or whatever, and I'm still in Islamabad. I miss Karachi because of family. My family is still there. I don't have any family in Islamabad, but I think it's always nice to be able to have a life where I can go to Karachi, be with family, and then come back to the beauty of Islamabad. Although, of course, Islamabad is also changing very rapidly.
Yeah.
I live in F11, which was completely boondocks when I first moved. There was nobody there. It was like part of the jungle. And
Now it's like one of the busiest
now
sectors.
it's one
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
busiest places.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the way cities are. That's the way these things are, how they move. But I do miss the quiet time of Islamabad. I miss that a bit. But thankfully, it is still more green than Karachi is.
So thank you so much for your time today. I know you're fasting as well. उसके बावजूद आपने time दिया, and we have a very useful conversation. I've learned a lot of things personally, and I'm sure like a lot of people who watched this, उनको भी बहुत सारी चीज़ों का पता चला होगा. And I hope to have you soon again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.
Enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for staying with us. If you've made it this far into this conversation, I would encourage you to just leave a comment and let us know if there's any particular topic that you would want us to cover or talk about. And I hope to see you guys soon again. Thank you.